Welcome, Greek U Nation, to episode number 184 of the Fraternity Foodie Podcast. I am your host, Mike Ayalon, CEO of Greek University. I'm a speaker and author of the book From Letters to Leaders, Creating Impact on Your College Campus and Beyond. We call these episodes the Fraternity Foodie Podcast because there is nothing like great food to bring fraternity and sorority leaders together. Fun fact, our second book on Amazon was just announced today, and it's called From Letters to Leaders, Redefining New Member Education and Leveraging Belonging to Eliminate Hazing. Our next guest was very, very kind to us by reviewing it. He said it is a wonderful book designed to give anyone associated with fraternalism, from student to VP, an initial primer for the issues that we deal with each year. Each chapter is well researched and serves as a jump-off point for further exploration. It should be on the shelf of every administrator in the country. We so appreciate that review from one of the best authors in the industry. So we really appreciate that. Thank you so much for that. Our next guest is none other than Lawrence Ross. He is a writer, author, journalist, screenwriter, lecturer, African-American consumer trends expert, and a social media fanatic. Lawrence Ross has spent the last 20 years understanding the African-American consumer market. His journalistic work has appeared in CNN, The Griot, The Root, and he's been interviewed by MSNBC, the BBC, NPR, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, and the Los Angeles Times. Lawrence is the author of 7 books, including multiple Los Angeles Times and Essence Magazine's bestsellers, including The Divine Nine, The History of African-American Fraternities and Sororities, as well as Blackballed, The Black and White Politics of Race on America's Campuses. Lawrence has a BA in American History from UCLA. He's also received an MFA in Screenwriting graduate of the UCLA School of Theater, Film, and Television. Lawrence is also one of the most popular lecturers on the college circuit, hands down. He's been lecturing on college fraternities, sororities, and the issues of hazing at over 700 college and universities. He's got me beat, hands down. It's an honor and privilege to introduce you to our listening audience. Welcome, Lawrence.
It is my pleasure to be on here. I appreciate you.
Oh, man, I tell you what, we always have a good time when we get together. So if we're going to do it virtually, I'm down with that. That is so cool. I can't wait where we get to hang out in person sometime soon. That's going to be a lot of fun.
That will be fun. I appreciate it way more than I did beforehand.
Yes, right. I mean, it has to be taken away from you in order for you to appreciate it. I mean, all the speakers on the circuit, we pass each other in these hallways. We're running to this lecture hall. I'm running to the other lecture hall. And it's like, hey, what's up? And it's just, you just keep on moving. And it's like, we never have time to just sit down and just chat for a couple of minutes. Like nothing.
And I am appreciative of every time I get a chance now. You're like, anybody want to say? I have things to say. So we're good.
Now, you chose UC Berkeley for your undergraduate experience. And I love that campus. It's beautiful. I've spoken there numerous times. But I'm wondering, why was Berkeley the right choice for you?
So I went to a Jesuit high school out here in Los Angeles, Loyola High School. It's the oldest educational institution in Southern California, and an all-boys school. And one of the things that kind of pushed me to Berkeley was that I was, as my mother, like to say that, when I was one of her child, I was the activist child. Okay. And I was an activist, at 14 years old, the idea of getting Martin Luther King's birthday off, which was not a federal holiday at the time. That tells you how old I am. And so one of my, the Jesuit priests said, hey, Berkeley's coming to do, kind of like one of their, tell us about Berkeley type things on campus. And he was like, hey, you should, apply. And I was like, I'm not really sure. My grandmother had worked at the ombudsman office at UCLA for, 20 years. So UCLA had always been, we were kind of no one had actually gone to UCLA, but we were a UCLA family, right? It was like a park to me, basically. And so he was like, no, you're going to apply to Berkeley. And I was like, okay. I didn't know where Berkeley was. He just thought that I was a great fit. And this was before you had pre-admission, I guess, what it would be. And so oftentimes, basically, Berkeley would go down to schools that they had really great records with, right? And Loyola is a kind of a meat grinder of an academic school. And they came out there and they were like, hey, well, here's your application. Here's your, your essay. You have a 99% chance of getting in. I was like, wait, this is easy, right? And so that was in September. By October, I got my acceptance letter. And so I didn't have to do anything. So I got to Berkeley and it was a perfect fit. And it was, Berkeley, the beautiful thing about Berkeley is that although I was a very, very financially poor student, meaning I was great in academics, I had no money. So my time at Berkeley was always about the struggle between having enough money to, stay in school, and then at the exact same time excelling in class. And I excelled in the classroom. It was just that I did everything from, I was on the Joker's Wild Game Show after my freshman year, where I earned enough money. I think I earned one semester's worth of money when my mother said, stop pulling that lever, into owning a catering service. My family is I have a family of caterers on both sides. And I began by doing a thing called a sweetheart dinner, where I would make dinners for my fraternity brothers who had dates because none of them could cook. And so the whole idea was I would make the dinner and they would just wow their dates, which they did. And it was a great thing. And so Berkeley kind of fits the ethos that I've always had, that began before the Jesuits, was really kind of hardened by the Jesuits about dealing with inequity and the whole notion that your intelligence isn't specifically just for your own edification. Your intelligence is a gift, either, you can say a gift from God or a gift to the world, to where you're supposed to be able to use that for those people who are not fortunate enough or who have inequities. And so therefore that's kind of like been my ethos, and Berkeley kind of really fit in. My first thing when I got to Berkeley is that there was a divestiture movement for South Africa, and I just stepped on campus and started protesting. So if you ever want to know my DNA, that's where it comes from. It's nothing new. And I always joke that at Berkeley, we protest Tuesday for not being Thursday. We're proud of it.
It really is the perfect fit. I mean, it makes total sense to me, especially since you were an activist at 14. That is the place for you to go. I mean,
it is
nowhere else.
It was the only other place I think I could actually think is maybe like Columbia or someplace like there. But it was such a perfect fit that, it's a weird thing, because Berkeley somehow, in some cases, kind of lives off a reputation from the 1960s, right? And so it's not necessarily how you think it is in the 1960s, but it does provide it is a school that does provide a width and breadth of, from the free speech movement to being exposed to things that, that you probably weren't exposed to prior to getting there. And for that, I always thank Berkeley for it.
Yeah, that's really good. You're also a member of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated, Alpha Epsilon chapter. So I'm wondering, what made you choose them over the other organizations that were there on campus?
Well, it's funny. My uncle is a Kappa, and my aunt is a Delta, and that's really only the things I kind of knew. And when I got to campus, one of my best friends who ran track with me in high school was a Kappa, and he was like, "Oh, came on campus, and boy, can't wait." And I was like, I didn't say I was going to play Kappa, and so what happened was that I actually really did have a good exposure to all the organizations, and every last one of them I have really good friends in, particularly on the Berkeley campus. We all are friends to this day. But there was something about Alpha, and I didn't care really about the flyer that said who all the famous names were. What I did note was that the Alphas on campus were the ones who really were engaged in every aspect of campus. And they didn't have to look the exact same. They weren't a stereotypical, here's the penny loafer Alpha khakis, which is kind of our stereotype. But there was the activist over here who never wore paraphernalia. There was the one who worked over in this particular center. There was the advisors over there. And I guess every time when you're looking for a fraternity, you look for something that fits your DNA. And my DNA was always about finding an organization where my ideas, and if you ask any of my fraternity brothers, I have 1,000 ideas. So as you probably noted that long litany for my bio, I needed a place where I could be with like-minded brothers where my ideas could actually breathe. And that was what I found with Alpha. I found kind of like this internal understanding that excellence was going to be the standard. Now, that does not mean any other, I'm not saying others weren't, or, didn't have that. But in terms of how I approached Alpha and how Alpha approached me, that was looked upon to be the standard. And I joke that every Alpha basically considers themselves to be mini Martin Luther Kings. If you ever met any of us, we all consider ourselves to be mini Martin Luther Kings. We just haven't gotten all the right, pieces together. But we're going to change the world. And one of the things as an Alpha man for the last 36 years, I pledged as a freshman. One of the things that I recognized was it fit with my ethos of I can excel, and that is perfectly fine. But I excel for my African American community, for the greater community of the American community, and there's a greater purpose. Just getting a Berkeley education or UCLA education is not the thing. American individualism, which is in some cases is fine, typically says I get my education, I go off and to get a job, I go to work, I buy my home, it's me, 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 me. Alpha provided a way in fraternalism for me to expand that selfish notion of me, to expand it out to others and to make an impact with others. And that's the reason why I love Alpha to this day.
Yeah, it is a really good fit for you. There's no question. But all the Kappas listening right now are like, man, we could have had Lawrence Ross.
Well, the funny part, I'll tell this story. I don't tell this story often. When I came back from Berkeley, my freshman year, I see my uncle who's a Kappa, right? And he was like, oh, it's all great. They're all great, right? So he had no issue with it, right? But I saw my grandmother. And so you have to understand my grandmother. My grandmother had my whole life plotted out at 13, right? Yes. So I was going to be on the Black Ski Club. I was going to be in Jack and Jill, and I didn't do any of those things, right? So her house, my grandparents' house, was one of those classic out here in Los Angeles. Was one of those two-story homes with that classic colonial style, pillars, Greek colonial style, Greek pillars, and she had the double doors that open up, and so I had my Alpha crossing shirt on. And she looked at it, she didn't even say anything. She just said, but all your uncles are Kappas. And I was like, just because what they do doesn't mean I'm she's like, okay, I guess I can do this. So this is the most hilarious thing. And then after that, she met all my frat brothers and she loved them. And she cooked everything for them. So it's always hilarious in terms of like our Thanksgivings in particular. So
I'm sure that's a lot of fun. Well, we have to talk about your book. Your book, The Divine Nine, The History of African-American Fraternities and Sororities, is easily the gold standard when it comes to comprehensive history of Black excellence in higher education. And what's interesting for people who don't know the story, you wrote the book because you didn't know anything about your wife's organization, Delta, or the others other than your own.
Yeah, the thing that kind of hit me was, I've been, like I said, my aunt's a Delta, married to that Kappa. So I'd seen things, over, growing up. And one of the things that always got me was on campus, people, this is pre-internet. Yeah, I know that sounds kind of strange for a lot of listeners, but it's pre-internet. But a lot of times what would happen is that, other people who were interested in Alpha, for example, would come over and say, could you tell me something about Alpha Phi Alpha? And really, we didn't want to be rude, but we were like, just go do your research, right? And we tell them to go do research. And the only book they could get was The History of Alpha Phi Alpha, which we conveniently stole from the library every time so, people could get it. And then we would complain internally that how come when they're coming into our informationals, which we used to call smokers, how come they're coming to our smokers with incomplete information? Well, it was a chicken and egg type of deal. Right. And one day I have a friend who went to Berkeley with me named Michael Datcher. And Michael Datcher had written a book called Raising Fences, an excellent book. It's kind of a memoir of his life. And it just so happened, I was working as a reporter, and just so happened that C-SPAN had created, before they did it all the time, they created this weekend of the book industry. And I was watching, me being obsessive, watch all 72 hours of it. And I was like, oh, now I understand, writing a book, and I've been wanting to write a book. And I looked on the shelf and I recognized my wife had In Search of Sisterhood there. And I realized that I had never like picked it up. I knew the, dates and of, where people were founded type of deal, but there hadn't been a primer for people to really understand all the organizations. And so I began thinking, I was like, maybe it would be a resource. Now, the funny part is that as I talked to all the organizations, I talked to every last organization, they were wonderful, right? I still say it was like herding cats, but it was still, they were all wonderful. The number one question they could not understand was why someone would be interested in reading a book about their history. And what they really at the time didn't really recognize was that Divine Nine history is American history, is African-American history. And so it took me 2.5 years to write it, to put it all together. But one of the things that occurred was each of the kind of the entities, those who were non-Greek, suddenly had a place where they could ask questions and read about without feeling that they were imposing on members. And members suddenly had more well-educated people coming to their informationals, and also the general public started to understand who and what we were. I always remember that we, as Alpha Epsilon, for my chapter at Berkeley, we would go to Berkeley High every year to do community service. And every year the principal would say, "This is fantastic. What's Alpha Phi Alpha?" And we were like, "How we've been here." And so the Divine Nine kind of really gave people a primer, so they were able to either do a deeper dive into the organizations, or be able to figure out if they were interested in organizations, which one fit their personality, the exact same way, I was able to figure that out.
What a great service that you've done to all the D9 organizations. I think that's fantastic. Helps it grow, helps people to understand, helps people in other councils to understand the culture, which they're not familiar with at all. As an IFC person, I just don't understand it until I read your book.
Yeah, it's one of the things. Yeah, and it creates better relationships. It's like anything. IFC, PanHell, and MPAC or MGC. We all want to have relationships, but you kind of want to know who the person is before you actually start talking. Right. And Divine Nine kind of works as that kind of initial place for people to come to a common ground.
And we agree the D9 organizations are very relevant today and are completely indispensable. You talk about the work that each organization is doing to improve society as a whole. What do you say to all the critics that are out there right now that argue that the history of hazing and brutality in fraternities outweigh the benefit?
Oh, that I would say that could be a viable argument against our organizations. No one should ever think that doing good deeds is going to trump any damage that happens to a human being or the death of a human being. I think one of the things that, in terms of fraternalism writ large, and obviously we're in a moment of the abolish the Greeks moment on various campuses. One of the things we have to recognize is that we're not exclusive when it comes to, say, for example, violence, when it comes to hazing or sexual assault and various things. What happens oftentimes is that we're the concentrated places where they occur. So the violence in terms of hazing occurs on our, in our organization, our ranks, or the sexual assaults happen within, I don't know if the statistic is, is correct, but, I think the statistic was around 7 times more, happening around a Greek row than anywhere, on campus. It is our duty to actually figure out and deconstruct all that. We say that we have all these great ideals and principles. Well, how do you live those great ideals and principles within the D9 too? You can't just simply go out there and, wear your letters and say, hey, we're great because Martin Luther King was great, or, Toni Morrison was great. You have to go out there and deconstruct within at the exact same time you do good outside. And that's kind of a task for everyone. It's a task for the alumni members to figure out policies that allow expression. We know, for example, Dr. Gregory Parks, one of my fraternity brothers, has done a huge amount of research about what Divine Nine members want when it comes to the intake. Gentry, McCreary, done a bunch of information for IFC and Panhellenic in particular. But a lot of times what happens is that we don't really take a look at it, on a macro level. And we don't make decisions based upon that information. We just kind of go by what we think is going to actually work. And when it comes to hazing, well, we're not, there shouldn't be any kind of acquiescence where we say, well, hazing is always going to be here. That's a way to make your organization obsolete quickly. But what we need to be able to figure out are what are the new ways going forward that satisfy the sense of need that people want, that also breaks down and breaks that connection to the visceral reaction of people having power and then using that power to haze. Mm-hmm. Because the biggest thing that we have to deal with, and this is in all the councils, is that people don't like being invalidated. And if you tell me that the process that I went through for hazing has no value, and I considered it to have a lot of value, well, then where am I within this organization? How do I recalibrate it to where I find value in something? Because the only thing that people typically see within the Divine Nine, or through probates and all the rest of the stuff, is the validation and respect that comes through what appears to have been a hazing process. And if you have that and you haven't come up with new ideas, then you're on the road to people making a choice, not only in terms of I want to abolish all Greeks and they're leaving the organizations or not becoming members, or you have people who will say, I'll just sue you. I'll just sue you until you don't exist. And so that's the big, I always look at problems as being things that are able to be overcome, but it requires us not to be complacent, particularly within the Divine Nine. Anytime I hear people say, well, tradition, first of all, know this, your tradition is pretty much probably about 48 months, okay, of things that you think that have always been there. And in reality, they have not. The most inconsistent thing in the Divine Nine has always been intake. Always been. It is the most inconsistent thing in terms of length of time, the inconsistency of what we learn. And it's all that inconsistency is multiplied by generations and is multiplied by the number of chapters. And so it's important to try to figure out what we can do and be brave enough to make bold choices and make bold decisions for the future to make it safe to become a member of the Divine Nine organization.
Mm-hmm. That inconsistency is probably the biggest thing that I see as well. I mean, if you look at our fraternities and sororities as franchises, I mean, McDonald's is not pumping out different hamburgers around the country. If I get it by you in LA, it's the same over here in Nashville, Tennessee. So, you know what I mean? So how is that okay that we're doing it differently all across the country?
Is because we've become chapter centric versus the organization. What happens is it reflects a lot of times what we see in America in general. People rail against the federal government until they need the federal government, right? Your road really needs, to be paved, right? You really need that, healthcare benefit, because guess what? You can't fix your own arm, those type of deal. And so a lot of times within fraternalism, we say, hey, my chapter has chapter traditions and we are only, we're basically chapter centric and that's the only thing we care. We tangentially have a connection to the national organization or the national brand, if you want to say that, right? We don't typically do as organizations. And you can't, as one of the former general presidents from Alpha once told me, you can't boil the ocean. And he was correct. You can't do everything as a national organization, but we can do some things to create the connectivity that says you're not just in your silo at Berkeley, right? You are interconnected with other people. This is not just a mythological or a psychological connection. There's a real connection with other people, and your behavior has a connection to it. And that requires saying, this is important. This thing, when you come as an 18 to 22-year-old or a 35-year-old, these things are important for you to maintain that connection. Right now, it's usually inward. It's nasal gazing. And then and you can always tell a telltale sign of a chapter that is disconnected from the national organization versus particularly within the Divine Nine. A chapter that's connected to the national organization disconnected from the national organization is very chapter centric, is look at their paraphernalia. If their paraphernalia has their chapter name in big letters and the organization in small letters, I can almost use that as a marker that there's going to be some hazing in that chapter, because that chapter is only accountable and answerable to that chapter.
Yeah.
And that chapter is saying, we don't care about everyone else. We just look at ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And that's usually a sign of dysfunction.
Yeah, I've seen that in IFC and Panhellenic organizations as well. Sometimes they'll sign their emails with, Alpha Lambda, chapter. And I'm like, what are you talking about? That's not the national organization.
Yeah.
Why are you signing your email with that?
Or in the Divine Nine, you'll have someone who's, I'm 55 years old. You'll have somebody who's like still using their college chapter as their thing. And I'm like, you haven't been in there in 36 years, right? Now, it's one thing to say, I came through Alpha Epsilon. I love Alpha Epsilon. We're about to have our 100th. We're basically all of us are getting together to like put together a centennial. We make that time precious. But I'm in Mu Sigma Lambda, as a chapter for alumni chapter right here. And it's important for us to start recognizing that it is okay to grow in fraternalism. It is okay to hold these things precious, but continue to grow in fraternalism as you are. No one wants to be around 18 to 22-year-old me, okay, who was probably like, I ate Taco Bell every day. You just didn't want to be, that guy was still trying to figure out the world, right? But that's the same thing in terms of fraternalism. I have a lot more wisdom in Alpha today than I did 18 to 22-year-old. I still have the bold ideas, but I know more. So let's reflect that. And I think we also kind of have to market, particularly with the Divine Nine, that it's okay. Those old people, once you graduate, in the graduate chapter who just keep telling you no, they're actually okay to be around. They're actually okay to be around. And I think once we are able to do that, then you get a macro understanding of the universe in which your organization exists. And then we get more activity at regional conventions and then national conventions, where you're able to break away from the chapter centricity to then seeing, well, wait a second, that guy over here is just as cool as the guy inside my chapter, or that woman over there thinks as much as about my sorority as anyone else. And I don't want to be the cause of something, happening. I don't want to be, the publicly shamed person.
I like that. We have to talk about blackball. This lecture on campus racism is one of the most popular in the country. You've lectured at over 300 colleges and universities. You've also brought your lecture, interestingly enough, into Gamma Phi Beta, Kappa Kappa Gamma, Delta Gamma, Beta Theta Pi. These are all IFC Panhellenic organizations. And then you were subsequently awarded the inaugural Jonathan J. Brandt Interfraternalism Award by Beta. And it came about because you saw Black students struggling with racial microaggressions, but also the overly racist behavior at their schools that were quite honestly often dismissed by the college administrators. So the first question is, have administrators realized that we are sick yet?
That's a great question. Because I always say, the first, step toward getting healthy is that you got to recognize that you're sick. Right. The answer to that question is that they're making their way to the doctor. Okay, they're making their way to the doctor. They haven't got the prognosis yet, but they're making their way to the doctor, and they're damn sure interested in not being like the neighbor who really is sick, right? Mm-hmm. And that's a step. And my blackball lecture is very, very provocative and bold, because in part, I have been going to conferences and I have lectured before IFC and Panhell way more than I can actually, all of my lectures are in front of, Panhell and IFC. Mm-hmm. One thing I never understood was how we approached racism and race when it came to IFC and Panhell. And I talk about during my lecture that the modus operandi used to be, we were good in we were that bad in the past, we're good now, live your values, and please let's stop talking about this as fast as possible, because I don't want any emails, I don't want your parents calling me, and I just don't want the hassle. And then we come to a kumbaya moment. But students of color would always come up to me at conferences, AFLV conference or NGLA or SEC IFC. They would come up to me, and I remember this one time, they just kind of took me to the hallway, and this is when I was doing Divine Nine lectures, right? And they would come to the hallway and they were like, I love my chapter brothers, but I went to the national convention and I felt way out of place. Not because it was predominantly white, it was because, you know, the Confederate flag symbolism or the remarks that were made or the racial microaggressions. And I just looked at it from a standpoint, well, okay, these may be anecdotal. Let me do a deeper dive. And I began doing a deeper dive, and then I broadened it out beyond IFC and Panhellenic, going all the way back to 1946. And it just became very evident that no one was really talking about it. They were just basically the same things that would happen, you know, Halloween, you know, MLK, Black History Month, Cinco de Mayo, from IFC and Panhellenic, they would come out, didn't matter, pre-social media. So I don't want to put it all on you Gen Z folks. It was my Gen X generation, baby boomer generation, the greatest generation. All these people were all doing these things. And my determination was, it didn't make any sense that students of color, particularly within fraternalism, had to take the burden. And we were asking them to take the burden. And universities were basically asking them to be perpetual protesters, as though protesting was their natural state. You know, I come here to be an engineer and I protest. Now, I went to Berkeley, again, protest is what I do, but not every student of color wants to spend their time protesting. They just want to have an academic environment or a social fraternal environment that doesn't denigrate them. And so if you've ever been to my lecture, and I'm still booking, so I'll just tell folks, if you've ever been to my lecture, it is an eye-opening lecture from the very first minute. And it's done not simply to be provocative, but to get your attention and to let you know that this is a lecture we're going to deal with the problem. And what's great is that this lecture, 300 or so, you know, college universities and the like, has been really effective in getting us a call to action for IFC and Panhellenic members. I have always loved the fact that, particularly my Panhell members, listen to this and they are about action. They are ready to go. They're like, Mr. Ross, we want to go out there and do it. I remember I had an IFC president at a Texas university. I'm not gonna say which one, but a Texas university who was like, Mr. Ross, I'm gonna get all the IFCs to in Texas to get rid of racism. I was like, slow down, just handle it, you know, your university, right? But that's great. That's wonderful. And then it goes beyond fraternalism. What happens is that now we're having students who go out into their community. They go into their job or whatever their field is, and they're going to be open and understanding and listening and having a different perspective to be able to see things that they probably weren't going to see before. And a lot of the number one thing people, students, white students in particular, say is, I never knew. And this is the same thing we do with gender. You know, we could do the same thing with gender. Men go through the world, you know, not thinking about women's issues. Or if we are straight and we're not listening and seeing LGBTQ issues because they don't affect you, you think. You know, we all have to have our eyes open. And I know people like to say, oh, the term woke, and it's been denigrated as being something that is really not. But really, it just means to be aware. And it really means to be aware, and then not only aware, then to take actions based upon that awareness. It's one thing to say, I don't like racism. Well, who does? Well, there are some people who do, but who does? Or I don't like sexism, or I don't like homophobia. Great. What are you going to do in this world to reduce racism, sexism, homophobia? What level of comfort are you willing to give up to speak up, or to take action, or to listen, to be able to live in a world, in, you know, a country that I believe in freedom and democracy, that you say everyone in this country is seen. Everyone in your chapter is seen. Everyone is not only seen, but they're heard. And I know this is long, but I have one of my favorite things is comes from a Delta Gamma member who I interviewed for Blackball. And this was right after, it was in St. Louis, right after the Ferguson, everything was happening in Ferguson with Michael Brown. Mm-hmm. And she just really didn't want to go chapter meeting, Black Delta Gamma member. And she's like, I'm just gonna have to answer all the questions. And she was like, my chapter is like 100 members and they're about 95% white, right? So she goes there and she, you know, and she gets in the back, she doesn't want to answer any questions. And her president stands up and she says, these protests are about police brutality and we have been too complicit. In fact, we have not been speaking out. And she goes, wait a second. oh, this was, wow, she actually understands what's going on. And she was able to influence the younger peers who were grew up, around the collar communities, predominantly white collar communities of St. Louis. She was speaking directly to them about the issues, to the point where she said, does anyone want to hear from me, in terms of doing this? But the greater part of that is that she knew that she had been seen and heard. And that meant that she really, truly did have a sister for life, because she saw her as a human being. College and universities need to see students of color in particular, but our organizations need to see our students of color as people. And big congratulations to all the organizations that have brought me. Kappa Kappa Gamma, Delta Gamma, Gamma Phi Beta, Beta Theta Pi. They brought me to campus to have that conversation. And too often our IFC and Panhellenic organizations are too scared of the blowback that they're going to have that conversation. I joked at the end of the, and I can't remember her name. She was just the bomb president of Kappa Kappa Gamma. Can't remember her name, and it just hurts my soul. But she's bomb president. And I joked at the end of my lecture to Kappa Kappa Gamma, and I said, look at this. 1,000 white women in a room, and none of y'all spontaneously combust because we talked about white supremacy. And they all laughed. And it opened the floor to everything. And that's important to be able to do.
Yeah, that's good that we're having these conversations, but we also need action, right?
True.
I mean, you asked the question whether PWIs are really worth it for African Americans, given the psychological damage to students due to racism. So the question is, are campuses doing enough action to actually address the problem?
Not yet. I think what is happening is that you're getting the performative. You're getting the statements, you're getting, kind of, we're going to have a DEI person. This is replicated what we do in IFC and Panhandle too. We have a diversity chair now,
That's
and then we just give we pick the Black person or the Asian person or the Latinx person, and, they're the diversity person. We don't integrate it within everything we do, but we just tell them, y'all give us some diversity stuff, right? And that is replicated what happens on a college campus, right? College campus has a DEI person who has to basically handle DEI for everything, right? And I think we're starting to move and do deeper things. University of Connecticut then just said that they looked at racism as a public health issue. That is a very interesting step, because just like the pandemic, anything that is a social, public health issue, you're going to study it and to look at it from the perspective of not just being individuals who make individual decisions upon, based upon racism, but you're looking at it as being systemic, and you're looking at it from saying, how do we mitigate that? So, okay, if we look at it as a public health thing, we're going to analyze the types of students that we bring in to our college university, right? But we can't change their views, particularly a state university like University of Connecticut. And I don't want to change people's views, right? But I do want to create an atmosphere to where people recognize the limits of what we're talking about in terms of points of view. Racism is not a conservative thing, and it's not a liberal thing. It's one of those things that when we talk about, it's a belief system. And that belief system is basically saying, through a pseudoscience, that on the just very, very basis of my skin color, that I'm inferior. And it's weaponized by this notion of white supremacy, which is obviously not, there's nothing supreme about whiteness, but it says, I can then craft policies. I can then craft policies that bend, society. IFC Panhellenic can, for years have racial exclusionary clauses in their things, right? And then even when you take them out, if you haven't changed your mindset, then you have, and I don't kick, Kappa Alpha on this, because they've been trying to get rid of this, but you have Old South parties in places, right? Or you have the Confederate flags over here. You can have all the policy changes you want, unless you're able to really make those actions really stick. Well, you're going to have some of the perpetual issues that you have, but they're just hidden. And predominantly white institutions are just now recognizing that you just can't slap some words on something and say that, oh, this is a change that we need to do. They used to just depend on the fact that every 4 years they were going to have a different cohort of students coming in. So the ones that protested, they're going to graduate, and maybe we'll get a more benign, or they're going to have to start from beginning in terms of protesting. It's the reason why I said when I did my research, after every campus racism incident, there was a system that I saw, which I call 3 I's equals a miss. The university's response or the institution's response was always the same: individualize the action, minimizes impact, and then trivialize it. And so that is not acceptable anymore for universities. And the question about Black students, whether or not they're going to PWIs, well, you're seeing an influx of Black students now, deciding to make decisions to go to HBCUs. Now, it's not that HBCUs are perfect. We're seeing that at Howard University. There's a protest about the living conditions at Blackburn. There's a protest at Blackburn Hall at Howard University. But there's still this kind of notion of, which is kind of a notion of saying, well, a rational decision. I want to go to a place that affirms me. I want to go to a place that actually sees me. And I think you're going to start seeing that trend continue. And predominantly white institutions are going to have to adapt to that.
Mm-hmm. Well, you've given me some hope today that at least we're moving in the right direction. Obviously, we don't have enough action yet, but at least you've given me hope that we're moving in that direction. So that
I mean, the one thing that we always should remember about America is that, in the redemptive nature about America, is that it's a little bit like what Winston Churchill once said: America will always do the right thing after they tried everything else. Okay, so I am a product of multi-generation progress, that of people who sacrificed X, Y, and Z for me to get to this place. My mother talks about, growing up in Texas, she didn't pick cotton, she pulled cotton. She's like, there is a difference, okay? But it's I am a product of all those aspirations and the progression, right? But the problem is that, my progression shouldn't be looked upon as a snowflake or an aberration. It should be something where anyone, in my circumstance, or anyone who looks like me, or my child, or anyone like my children, should be given that same opportunity. It shouldn't be an abstraction. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying on the college campuses, we're trying to get rid of those abstractions, that idea that, to succeed here is an abstraction. We want to succeed. Everyone goes into college understanding that it's going to be tough academically. That's completely fine. Mm-hmm. We can all deal with that. Don't put another burden on me that I didn't earn.
Yep, that's fair. All right, we have to talk about your new business. You started this new business called 365 Ally. The mission there is to deconstruct the economic barriers that disadvantaged communities face. So how did you come up with this idea for this business?
It's because the pandemic gave me endless time to think. So no, it actually did. So one of the things that happened is that right after George Floyd was murdered, I own, if you're looking back here, this is a place called the Metaphor Club where I own. Fraternalism is always around me. So I own the Metaphor Club, which is a Black-owned creative co-working space here in Los Angeles. And I own it with 3 of my fraternity brothers who I've known forever. One who went to Temple University, another one who went to Berkeley, and unfortunately one who went to Stanford University. So we were joking that we were in the world's most expensive private club because we couldn't meet during the pandemic. And what happened was that a lot of my white friends began saying, "Hey, how can we support your business?" And we appreciative. It's a pandemic. We didn't have that on our bingo card of things that could affect our business, right? And so they would donate student memberships and things like that. That was perfectly fine. But I also began thinking to myself, well, how can you, I always love a problem. How can we go beyond the performative to find Black, Latinx, AAPI, Indigenous, women-owned, disabled, and LGBTQ and allies, white allies, who own businesses, small business owners, who could be all in one particular place. And therefore, it's called 365 Ally. People could 365 every single day actually support these businesses. It wouldn't require a tragedy or a particular month or something like this. And they would be centered versus being kind of like an appendage to a larger place. And nothing against Etsy or Yelp or any place like that. But this is where they're centered, right? And you wouldn't have to search too hard for them. They're there. And I started work on 365 Ally. I literally spent a year, and it literally came out yesterday. Okay. I still think I have the test products on there. I haven't taken those down. But the whole idea is to be able to get people to intentionally spend, and I call it intentional economic diversity. We oftentimes talk about, brands will typically do this. They'll have like this one, this one small business that's a Black-owned business, and they'll say, hey, Coca-Cola is sponsoring this particular business, and we're giving them $10,000 for XYZ, and that's great for that business. But small businesses tend to run on a $20 and a $40 here and a $30 there. And my whole idea is to get people to say, either you're going to come to the site and explore in what places that they want to purchase every day. You don't have to buy every day, but explore. And if you find something interesting that you do think someone else would be interested in, share it. And then bring those people and into the space. That's it. And what I always tell people, I'm going to do a number of different things to kind of support the businesses. Personally, I'm spending $365 every month on different vendors within the system, and then I will give you a review. And I'm going to be donating these items to various places. I'm also going to have some celebrities. We're going to do the exact same thing. They're going to have $365, and they're going to go and they're going to buy various items, right? But right now you're going to go there and you're going to go, where are the items? There are no items there yet. Basically, from now until January, all I'm doing is basically getting vendors into the system. I'm looking for vendors. I don't care if you crochet and you sell that's perfectly fine. It's $9.99 beginning on January 1st per month to be in the system, and it's 5% per transaction. You got to pay the service, some way on the computer service. But from now until January 1st, it's absolutely free to be in the system, and the sales will be live. So people will be able to buy, and it will just be the 5% transaction fee. So I am looking for all of those groups, really. I can't tell. Small businesses, whatever it is. And you can be also, the other thing is not just goods. You can also do services. If you have a beauty salon or you have a nail shop, people can reserve on my system. Or if you have a restaurant. If you have a restaurant, we want it there. It acts as two things. It acts as a marketplace, and it also acts as a directory. Now, this comes where you and I are on the road all the time, right? So we're on the road all the time, and typically when we arrive in a place, we have a choice of, we get on Holiday Inn, and we have a choice of an Applebee's and an Outback Steakhouse, right? Okay. And God bless Applebee's and Outback Steakhouse. I think they gave me 25 pounds over the last 20 years. But a lot of times we don't know other places that we can actually go to, right? Or we don't know other goods and services in a local place. 365 Ally acts as that kind of directory. So not only can you purchase online, but you can also see where they're located. And if you go to a particular place, you can put Nashville. And if you're bringing my son, he will say Nashville hot chicken, yes. And he will be able to find, we had that last week. We will be able to find all the different places. So, but in a bigger thing, the big thing goal is obviously to have thousands or hundreds of thousands of businesses on it. I always say as a writer, there's the external, to have hundreds of thousands of, it's a viable business. But the internal is to deconstruct all the barriers to businesses of color, businesses with the disabled, businesses with LGBTQ, everyone, businesses based on gender. We want everyone to actually be seen. And I think we're going to see some exciting things.
Yeah. So if we have a business that's listening right now that wants to get listed, do they just go to the Apple Store? They go to the Play Store? Where do they go?
It's not on that. It's not on the app anymore. We had an app, but we kind of retired. It didn't do all the functionality we wanted. Okay. All you have to do is go to 365ally, ALLY.com. You can go right there. Like I said, I still have test products up there. Don't worry about them. Just ignore the dust on the floor. Just go to there and you can sign up. You can literally sign up as a user, and you can sign up as a vendor. It's free for our users to come on and take a look. And then as a vendor, it will be this trial period is absolutely free until January 1st. Then the $9.99 will kick in. But we're looking for vendors during this particular point in time. I'm just going to tell any users you're not going to see a lot of products up there. There will start to become, you will see more products as we go along, but give me a good month and a half, 2 months. But it doesn't matter. You'll see a bunch of different categories. Put your stuff up there. And then this is my other thing. Hang with us for a year. It's like building a town. All right. I'm building a town. I'm advertising. So don't have it to where I advertise, oh, she has the best jewelry, and then you're not there. Hang out, make it an investment. I promise you, your accountant will say you can write off that $9.99, but that helps us in terms of being able to have a vendor pool that people actually want to visit on a regular basis.
I love it. 365ally.com. That's really good. Now, I also want to help disadvantaged communities when I come out to LA. So what restaurants would you recommend in LA that I go and visit?
Oh, okay. If you want to come out here, now it depends on what you're looking for. Okay, so if you come out here, the number one thing that everyone, it's like the Black Disneyland. Okay, you have to go if you come to Southern California. So you go to Roscoe's Chicken and Waffles.
Oh, right.
That is, I can say locals go to it too, but it's like it's on the stop. We actually had one of my friends at Sigma Gamma Rho. She came out here for the second time in her life, and she was the only thing she had was Roscoe's Chicken and Waffles. That's all I got to do. So okay, fine. So you go to Roscoe's Chicken and Waffles. There's a Louisiana a restaurant called Harold and Bells that you can go. It's wonderful. It's oftentimes a kind of a celebration, graduation. It's a special meal type of deal. But if you come out, it's a great spot. You can also Doolin's restaurant, run by an Alpha man. Adolf Doolin was the originator, and his son Greg Doolin is an Alpha man. He operates it right now. That's just in a handful, but there are a lot of different really good restaurants around here. The one thing in Los Angeles does not suffer from is food. And so if you want the best, like the big thing right now, which I don't even want to say because it's gonna make me crave them, and I think I'm probably pronouncing this wrong, a Birria tacos. And out here, they are basically a Tijuana version of tacos that are just, I could eat 11 billion of them. And if you go to Boyle Heights in East LA right now, it makes goosebumps come on me because they're so good. And so they are like the real big thing now. So if you want to go out there, definitely hit that up. And hopefully in the next 2, 3 months, 6 months, we'll have a whole listing of restaurants that you can hit up on the site.
That sounds fantastic. I'm gonna have to bring my bicycle out there so that way we can lose some weight as we're eating all of this.
Hey, during the pandemic, we all got in our bikes, and we all got in our biker gear. And if you're gonna do biking, go down to Bologna Creek. It's a beautiful bike path. It goes all the way down like the marshes and then hooks into the beach. So it's the number one bike path. And then you could also do the river, the LA River. People forget that we have a river. It's not much of a river, but it's a river. It's usually just basically a place where all the police cop chase scenes in movies occur because it's a concrete space. But you can do the Bologna Creek or you can do the LA River tour. So definitely you can do that.
Good. And we always all the food.
Yeah. Well, pretty much. That's we joked about the fact that the pandemic turned a whole. We had a group of alphas, kappas, omegas. We all would ride, and we were like, we turned into environmentalists because we were like, this species should be in our neighborhoods, and we were like, we'd never seen this species in our lives, and we were like, yeah, we're going to advocate for this species, and we were like, okay. Years of bike riding turned us into environmentalists. So
I love it. All right. So if our students who are listening or the administrators that are listening right now, if they want to bring you in to deliver your blackballed lecture on campus racism, where should they go in order to connect with you?
So they can email me at alpha1906. This is the most alpha phi alpha email address you can have. ALPHA1906 at gmail.com. I am usually I'm almost fully booked by Thanksgiving, but this year I had so much stuff going on. I haven't been able to really kind of like send out my outreach and everything like that. So I only really have three things: AFLV, Big 12, doing a keynote at Big 12, and one school is about looking to book. But by February, this is the weirdest thing. So from January 15th, well, 17th for Martin Luther King, which normally starts my thing to my year, until March, I'm completely open, so which never happens. So let me know, and I'll send you all the information.
Let's get that filled up for Lawrence Ross. I appreciate that. It's always a pleasure just hanging out with you and listening to you. I love every minute of it. It's really precious for me. So I hope we get a chance to do that soon in LA, or maybe at some of these conferences. We'll see each other around the country.
Always a pleasure. And it's and best of luck on your book. Everyone purchase it. One of the things I want people to understand is that books are hard to write. Okay, so books are hard to write, and if people put a lot of energy into it, and particularly books on fraternalism. So make sure that you have it inside your library. And I didn't lie when I said it should be on every administrator's bookshelf, because what you want is to have a collection. Basically, what's going to happen, I can guarantee you, is that you're going to have to buy 3 or 4 copies because it's going to get stolen. So buy 3 or 4 copies, put it on your bookshelves, and then just charge it to, as the kids say, charge it to the gram, and just, buy a couple of copies. So, all your counselors will be able to read it and everything.
I like that suggestion. That's been great. If our listeners, if you like this talk with Lawrence Ross, please like it. Please share it with other students on campus. Make sure that he's booked all throughout January and February. That can't happen. That should be his busiest time of the year.
It normally is.
So we got to get that filled up for him. And what can I say? Thank you so much for being here. Thank you to our listeners. We'll see you on another episode of Fraternity Foodie. Thanks so much. We'll see you next time.